How do we even start this ridiculousness? I don't know. Well, hey friends, Raj back with you. I hope you're doing well. Usual caveats, still in cancer therapy. Actually, I had my last chemo treatment last week, so ding ding, ring the bell. Thank you very much to everyone who sent a kind word of encouragement. I really appreciate that. But let's get down to business, shall we? What are we even doing here? This guy you may recognize from my last video. It was a review of the stock guitar that formerly was a KGD Amazon Strat copy, about $225. I said that my next video would be modding this thing, and I've done that. I've done that to the nth degree, but still, I think, within the scope of reason, basically trying to hit that point of diminishing returns, which admittedly is a bit subjective when it comes to guitars. However, I think that I have reached the place with this. I'm still doing a little bit of work cosmetically to it, but where I feel confident that you could take this out, gig this guitar, bring it on tour, get all the Strat sounds, be perfectly happy with it, have good reliability, all that good stuff. So that in turn led me to borrow this, which is a very expensive custom shop Fender Stratocaster, the Journeyman series. Look at this beautiful checking. It's insane. I think it's a great guitar, and there's a whole video series that we could do on where the value in something like this lies. If we start delving into the conversation about investment or even instruments as art themselves, which I think is valid, I think it's relatively safe to say that this is in a class far beyond not only this guitar, but most other instruments that are Strat style guitars. So that is not my intent today. My intent is to approach this mostly, not completely, but mostly as tools of the trade. And is there anything about this $4,000 or $5,000 guitar that this guitar, which is about a zero less, can't do? I want to point out the inherent differences, as well as everything I did to this guitar to put it in the state that it is right now, and maybe discuss a little bit of the legend and the myth and the folklore behind one of Leo's most famous instruments, and how that can serve us or maybe harm us when we're looking for that perfect instrument for us. Okay, before I get into the mods I made on this KGD/mod shop, let's talk about some specs, things that I couldn't easily change anyway. The bodywood, mahogany on this mod shop and alder on the fender. The body thickness, though, is about the same on both, about 1.75 at the thickest points of these bodies, which is pretty standard for a Strat style guitar. The neck wood, we have roasted maple on this mod shop and maple on the fender. A couple things that really affect the difference in feel: a 12-inch radius on the mod shop versus a 9.5-inch radius on the fender, and the thickness of those necks. There's about 0.83 inch at the first fret to 0.89 inch at the 12th fret on the mod shop, and it starts off the same, 0.82, really close, but it goes all the way up to almost an inch, 0.97 on the 12th fret of the fender. The finishes, wildly different. Fairly certain it's polyester on the mod shop, at least the top coats. Hard to say what's underneath that as far as sealer and whatnot, but feels a lot like polyester to me. And on the fender, of course, nitrocellulose lacquer. A couple other specs worth mentioning. The neck width at the nut is almost exactly the same on both guitars, 1.65. The string spacing is a little different, and that's just the cut of the nut itself. That mod shop, the string spacing at the nut on that is 1.37 inches versus 1.42 inches on the custom shops. The string spacing at the bridge, which is a function of the saddles more than anything else, but slightly different there. On the KGD mod shop, we've got 2.09 inches. This is from outside of the E string to the outside of the E string on both the nut width and the string spacing at the bridge. And on the custom shop, it is 2.19 inches. So 0.1 inch difference there. That's at the bridge, the widest point of that splay. So I don't know that I could feel the difference in playing even at 0.1 inches. And beyond that, in terms of specs that I didn't change or couldn't change, are the frets themselves. So the custom shop folks tell me that these are supposed to be 6105 frets. The published spec is a little different than what I measured on these guys. These guys are actually a little higher than the published spec, so the fret height on the custom shop is 0.0595 inches versus on this guy we've got 0.0530 inches, so not quite as high. This is actually closer to the 6105 published spec in terms of height. These are more of a jumbo fret, so these are slightly wider, and medium jumbo for the 6105, so slightly narrower, but the height is very close to the same. I mean, basically we're within a fret level job of the same fret height on both. The custom shop has nickel silver, kind of a regular material fret, whereas you have stainless steel frets on this guy. And this is something I mentioned in my review video. The fret ends come from KGD with hemispherical rounded ends. Not always my favorite. On this guitar, I think, though, they're implemented very well. They're actually inset just ever so slightly. So there's a little space between the edge of the fretboard and where that rounded end starts. And even though it's just a fraction of a millimeter, it makes a difference if you happen to play with your thumb hanging over the edge. Functionally speaking, I don't think there's any difference between what you're able to do on a hemispherical fret end versus a more traditional chamfered fret. You can't do anything special on this guy, but some folks have a strong preference one way or the other. I really don't. If they've been set up well, I can go either way. All right, let's dig into the mods that I've done on this. So firstly, I'll go through the aesthetic things I've done to this, starting with the neck. So the first thing I did was take some 400 grit sandpaper and forcefully remove the logo from the headstock. Then 600 grit all over the neck, really, just to kind of, smooth out a couple rough spots and give me some surface area. Then I used some trans tint dyes to darken some spots and kind of give it a little bit more of an aged look to match the body. Trans tint is soluble in either water or alcohol, so use alcohol in this case. And then once I got that where I wanted, a couple coats of shellac. Shellac is great. It kind of sticks to everything. There's usually no adhesion issues no matter what's under it or over it. So it's a good barrier between different types of finishes as well, quite often. So in this case, a couple of coats, and then I dropped in my water slide decal, and then burned in the Mod Shop logo Once that's done, a little polish actually gives that mod shop its silver. And then a couple more coats of shellac on top of that and burnished it out to wherever I wanted it to be. And then I roughed up the back of the neck just a hair after that, just to give me a little bit less of a gloss on the back of the neck. One additional thing that I've done to the neck is I have actually replaced all of the fret markers. And this is just a pet peeve of mine. When you get a cheaper guitar, a lot of times it has a pearloid, very white, kind of just ugly plastic dots. And it's a telltale sign of being cheap, but aesthetically I just don't like it. So I go through and I replace the dots. I've used a lot of different kinds of materials. These happen to be ABS. Sometimes I will have used vulcanized fiberboard, which is what Fender used in the early days. They never used clay. As far as I know, somebody can provide evidence that they actually use real clay. That would be interesting, but I don't think they did. In the early days, they used vulcanized fiberboard, which is what is used here, I believe. I'm not sure if that's in the spec or not. It doesn't really matter, but obviously they have aged these. Your finger oils and dirt and grime over the years can change that vulcanized fiberboard. For me, personally, aesthetically, this is a little dark, a little too orange for me. Looks great, fits the vibe of the guitar, but I chose to go quite a bit lighter. It's hard to say how this is going to show up on YouTube after all the stuff, but you're able to dye ABS a bit, you know, once you have abraded them and whatnot. But the fringe benefit of doing that, you basically take out the old dots. I'll put some video of this happening, and you put the new dots in, and then you scrape back the material in those dots. In the process of doing that, you're inevitably going to scrape the fingerboard back. And so I took that opportunity to actually scrape the entire fingerboard back, fret by fret. There was a little bit of a finish on there, so now that rosewood can breathe. I don't think it makes any difference in terms of sound, but it does allow me to properly condition the fretboard with lemon oil from time to time. And so that's been done. And I think that brings us to the body. So we're still in the world of aesthetics here. Now, obviously, this guitar came with a relic finish, sunburst below this jasper green is what they call it. I've done a little bit of additional relicing, a little bit of finer work to my taste. You know, this is obviously a taste thing. So I've gone through on both sides, and I've done a little bit more, trying to bring out some more of this sunburst where I could. And I've also started the process of doing some checking in here. And obviously this is a polyester finish. You're not going to ever get this kind of finish to check naturally. So you can kind of see some of this checking that's been done so far. I've still got quite a bit to work on. It's a very slow process using a scalpel, and then eventually some shoe polish. And those check marks will come out, and they'll be very subtle. And to be frank, no one else will ever see it aside from me. If you're 4 feet away, you're never going to see it, but I dig it, so I have done it. And that pretty much wraps up what's been done aesthetically to the guitar. So let's get into the hardware modifications. All right, back to the headstock. We have new tuners on here. These are Fender Road Worn, and for my money, they are that point of diminishing returns and maybe beyond. Functionally speaking, I would go ahead and make the claim that these are exactly the same as the ones on the Custom Shop. They're not the same. The ones in the Custom Shop are branded Fender, and the Road Worn, even the Fender Road Worn tuners are not branded Fender, but I believe they're the same ratio. I believe they're the same materials. These are a nickel finish, so they are already patinaed to some degree, but they will continue to patina over time. And I like them. I put them on a bunch of guitars, and they're like $35. Sometimes you can find them on sale for $25, but I'm going to go ahead and say $35 for the purposes of this video. Now, the holes on a lot of imports, including this one, are 10 millimeter, and that's bigger than the bushings that come with vintage tuners. So these bushings were an additional $6, I think, something like that. So they're nickel. For the bushings that I purchased, the pick guard screws, which were on the guitar initially, and the strap buttons, which were original to the guitar, those were nickel. So I actually aged all those with a little etchant solution. This is dangerous stuff, potentially, so I'm not suggesting you should do that. This is not how to, it's what I did. But just know that's acid, so it's got nasty side effects like burning through your skin or blinding you. One of the most painful modifications I made was purchasing this road-worn string tree. This is a Telecaster style string tree, which I like the aesthetic of and the function of. But the $12, which is very difficult for me to do. All right, the nut was a bone nut, so I didn't mess with that. Like I said before, I gave it a little more love, polished it up. So I just went ahead and I relicked this myself with the little quad-aught steel wool and etchant solution. It was chrome, not nickel, so you know, it is what it is. I've got a nickel curved one on order, so I'll replace this and it'll look a little less hokey. But that was the original neck plate. So we only have 3 more things on the list. Only 3, because this guy, this is a loaded pick guard from Music Lily, sold on Amazon between 80 and 90 bucks usually. It has Art Tech pickups in it. It has full-size brass knurled 250K ohm pots. It has orange drop cap. It has a treble bleed circuit. It has a Korean-made 5-way switch, a real deal, not PCB. It has pushback wiring. It's done very well. I'm going to run some of that footage. Just a really good value for what you get, in my opinion. And maybe more importantly to this little comparison that we're doing here between this guy and this guy, not unsimilar specs, right? The way I think about pickups, and I am by no means an expert. I don't wind my own. I don't want to. Good Lord. God bless you if you do that. But this way of thinking about it has been very effective for me as a builder in speccing my OEM stuff and as a player for just getting the right set of pickups in a guitar. Okay. If the general construction is the same, if the magnet type is the same, if the wire gauge is the same, and, you know, maybe wire type, but definitely the wire gauge, those things are the same, and you look at the specs, the DC resistance, which is the ohmage reading, and the inductance, which is the most important spec that so few pickup manufacturers list, and it drives me crazy because it would tell you everything you need to know. So if those commonalities are there, you look at the DC resistance and the inductance, and if they're in the neighborhood of one another, it's going to be a similar sounding pickup. And in terms of commoditization of these things, that 10% deviation is Fender's own spec. These Mod Shop, Architect pickups, and the Custom Shop pickups are in the same neighborhood. Measured through the jack, so through all of the electronics, which I like to do when I'm comparing guitars because all those things that happen after the pickup matter. We've got a deviation between 8 and 11% on DC resistance and under 5% difference for the inductance, the Henry's reading, right? That translates into very similar sounding pickups. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean the guitar will sound the same. The height of the pickup is terribly important, and I haven't gone to great lengths to set these up exactly the same in that regard. The playing, the player, of course the amp, the way the amp responds, all that stuff will make a big difference. But if you have the general construction, if you have the magnet, if you have the wire, if those things are the same and the DC resistance and the inductance look the same, the pickup probably operates very much in the same way. On this loaded pick guard, we've got the first tone knob is shared between the neck and the middle, and the second tone knob is dedicated to the bridge, and I much prefer that. I think a lot of folks would agree that the bridge pickup is somewhat tenuous and difficult to get right on a Strat. I much prefer to have a tone control dedicated to the bridge, and that is what we have got going on here. Another relatively painful purchase is this relic nickel jack plate. I couldn't find one on Amazon that was going to ship within like months. So I bought this from Guitar Fetish, and I hated spending that kind of money on a jack plate. If I was going to do it again, I would just buy a normal nickel jack plate and use etchant solution on it the same way I did with the pickguard screws and strap buttons, and it would work just fine and save me probably half that money. And that brings us to the last thing that I added on this guitar, which is this Geiger bridge. I'm a big fan of Geiger, and this bridge in particular. I've bought several of these now for Mod Shop Strats. I might start sourcing these for some of my Blevins original guitars. Construction-wise, you have bent steel saddles, and pretty much everything up top is going to be very similar to what you've got going on the Fender. Now, this is all sized out for an import guitar, so the mounting screws probably would not line up on a USA-made guitar, just in case you're wondering that. And this block, even though it's full size and quite heavy, is zinc as opposed to brass or stainless steel or solid steel or whatever. I don't really care. That's why I bought this one. I don't care because I don't hear a difference. By the way, this hardware came with this as well. Really, the only thing I dislike about those small blocks in terms of functionality is the way the tremolo feels. I like the heavier counterweight of a full-size block, and so that's what I put in here. I'm going to do an A-B through all the pickups between this guy and the Custom Shop. Hopefully the same lick played kind of the same way. That's about as good as I can do. And you'll see, I feel like they're very, very similar sounds. Obviously, no two sets of pickups is going to be exactly the same. The height from the bottom of the strings at the pickup isn't the same, if for no other reason than they are different radii. So there's going to be a slightly different curve here, here, and here if they're set up right. So, you know, we're splitting hairs in my opinion, but you can make your own. So a couple of closing thoughts. This is a gorgeous piece of art, in my opinion. And like with any other art, it is worth what the artist can sell it for, monetarily speaking. It has other value, but monetarily speaking, it's worth what someone will pay for it. And obviously someone, thank you very much, by the way, to Dallas Dillard, who loaned me this guitar, and he is over the moon with this, and I would be too if it was mine. And I will say this as part of my closing thoughts. I build guitars somewhat for money, but also for love and passion and all that good stuff. And I could not do this. My skill set, my shop, and not to mention my health issues would not allow me to make this guitar. Shooting nitro is sticky business. It's very nasty stuff. It gets in your lungs. If you don't have proper ventilation and all that stuff, it's pretty funky business. And so I don't shoot nitro. Most of my guitars that are lacquer are acrylic lacquer. It's a little less nasty, and I can control that a little bit more. But even if I did shoot nitro, this finish, the way the checking is done on this finish, is done by someone with a very high level of execution, higher than what I could do. I could pay someone to do this and it would cost me a pretty penny. It wouldn't be a $150 body that you find on Amazon, which you can do. You can find a nitro finished relic on Amazon, and I've done that. No issues whatsoever. And if you want to go down that road, that's awesome. You're not going to find something that looks like this in that price range. This finished job by itself would cost far more than several of those guitars, right? The neck is gorgeous. It plays beautifully. It is a Fender neck. You could buy a Warmoth to the same spec. It still wouldn't be a Fender neck, so there's a little bit of that brand loyalty and that romanticism knowing that it came from Fender, and everybody has their different opinions about Fender as a company now versus Fender as a company in 1955, but still, it's Fender. And a Warmoth neck or an MJT neck or any of those companies who do great work probably won't have the same value in a couple years' time that this guy will. So it's worth keeping in mind. It's part of the equation of buying a custom shop Strat. So we're getting further away from treating these just as tools and getting into the art or the investment part of things. And like I said, I don't want to get too far down that road, but I understand, having spent more time with this than I have with any other custom shop before, I understand that a bit more now. And my position has softened a little bit on, sometime in the future, sometime beyond cancer, owning something like this as an heirloom or whatnot. I think there's an allure that is hard to put into words, but we probably all understand, everybody watching this video. So yeah, beautiful instrument. Thank you so much, Dallas, for letting me borrow it. I will leave you guys with a little playing, and let me know what you think.